Hello and welcome to another edition of Not a Collection of Parts. This time I'm going to be talking about fascia. There's loads of stuff around it. Lots of people are talking about it. It's one of those things that is very popular at the moment. So I wanted to shed a little bit of light and a little bit of dispel a few myths about it. So let's get stuck into it on Not a Collection of Parts. So the thing about fascia or fascia, depending on how you want to go about it, is that, you know, I'm not here to sort of pour cold water or scorn on anybody, whatever they're doing. I just really want to sort of think about creating a narrative that is a little bit more real and factual rather than some of the stories that spring up around some of the things we talk about when we talk about fascia. So this week we're going to be looking at the fascia, the myths and the facts from the sublime to sometimes what I would refer to as the biologically suspect, and you could say that's BS as well if you like. I don't mind. But you know, we have to look at these things. So please, just a quick reminder, please do reach out, support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Julian Baker. It's the kind of thing that's going to help me a lot as far as making sure that I can continue to do this and put out this content and keep it low cost and free. So the question we have to ask ourselves is it, you know, I've said it before, is that fascia is no such thing, and it might be an inflammatory remark, and I wouldn't apologise for making inflammatory remarks because, you know, it gets people talking, and, you know, it's deliberately inflammatory, and I get that. But when I say there's no such thing as fascia, there's no single thing that we can think of that we would refer to as fascia, and that's the point here. And when we create a narrative that is doubtful and unreliable, then this creates sort of barriers about discussing what is really happening and the work we do. And I have no issue of making up stories or creating, you know, examples to help clients, but there's been a tendency over the years to sort of create things as being a truth that isn't really there. Now, the thing about fascia is that there's a lot of things that make up the thing that we call fascia. So these are things like epimysium, perimysium, endomysium. We're not going to go into what they are, but essentially these are different types of the same thing, and you could all look at them. You could look at them all and say, right, you know, these are all different types of fascia. It depends on where you are in the body. It depends on the type of minerals and salts and function that there is in the body and everything else. So there isn't a specific thing that you could look at and go, that's fascia, rather than that isn't. And we'll get to the sort of the various bits of it in a minute. So the main thing that everything has in common as far as fascia is concerned is that it's collagen, and collagen is this triple helix. It's a triple strand that's made up, it's made up of, the actual fibers are made up of 3 strands, and the beginning strand is a pre-collagen fibers, but the actual collagen fiber is 3 strands. It's a triple helix, and these things wrap around each other in a clockwise or counterclockwise direction, but it makes the collagen fibers very, very strong, and when they clump together and they sheet together, then they become even stronger. This is an electron microscope picture of collagen fibers lumped together. And it can be arranged in sheet-like presentations. It can be, you know, really fibrous. It can be fluffy. It can be dense. It can be, what was that Mika song? I can be blue. I can be violet sky. So it could be lots and lots of different things. It presents in lots of different ways, and sort of little pictures, the ideas of the collagen, how it looks there. So the thing is about collagen is that you could say that collagen is to humans what cellulose is to plants. So if you've ever grabbed a stick of celery and you've had a good old munch on a lump of celery, then that fibre, there's that saying that goes, you get more. It takes more calories to eat it than there are in the thing. Well, that's because of the fibres in it. So those fibrous bits that we're chewing on, they are the cellulose fibres. They are the fibrous elements of plants. And that is, as far as humans is concerned, that's the equivalent of collagen. And collagen makes up about 30%, a third of all our proteins. And there's loads of different proteins we have in the body, but collagen is the most common protein in the body. And, you know, depending on who you talk to, it makes up about 35-40% of our proteins. So it's a lot. It's everywhere, and it's in everything, and it's in bones and skin and you name it. But predominantly, it's in this stuff that we refer to as fascia, or different types of connective tissue. So that brings us neatly on to the next thing that we need to talk about, which is connective tissues. And so there's lots of different types of connective tissue in the body, and we have bone, cartilage, skin, and even blood. So blood is in that. Now, it's a bit of a controversial. Not everybody agrees that blood is connective tissue because it doesn't have enough fibers to make it connective tissue. But there is fibers in blood, and it's called fibrinogen, and it's the stuff that sort of makes your scab effectively. But that's not, it's not the classical connective tissue that you find everywhere else. But and there are other connective tissues that aren't in here, but muscle isn't a connective tissue, whereas skin and cartilage, and of course tendon thing is. So there's lots of within that. There's lots of different categories and subtypes, and different classifications, and there isn't necessarily a consensus in relation to the names that we give it. And what's happened over the years is that there's been a bit of a vacuum as far as our understanding is concerned, and people have sort of jumped into that vacuum to fill it with sometimes a bit of nonsense. The thing that we're talking about as far as fascia is concerned is it falls under a category, and that sounds a bit weird, but it falls under this category of connective tissue proper. Not that the rest of the connective tissues aren't proper, it's just that that's just what this is called. And so if we look at, say, the tissue that's sitting in the lower back, and this is a picture of the lower back there, you can sort of see in around there, that's the top of the glute maximus, and that's the lower back, and in that area there, this is these really dense fibers, and they all come together and they create a thickened band of connective tissue called the thoracolumbar fascia. And this thoracolumbar fascia is the stabilization element of for the lower back, and it's a really, really important bit of kit because it holds us upright. It's around the lumbar spine, going down into the sacrum, and it's massively strong. And it contains the housing for all the back structures. So it's the thing that it's the root, it's the base of our tree, and without it, we'd fall over. So it's the bit that can get stiff because that's how it works. If we've got stability, then we can also end up with stiffness as well. There's a fine line that we walk along that line. So so if you look at a few other areas. So this is the fascia that wraps around the leg. This is what we refer to as the crural fascia. And this type of fascia is what's referred to as an aponeurotic fascia. Aponeurotic means sheet-like fascia, and it wraps around the leg, and it covers the whole of the leg. And you tend to find that there's more dense fascia in the lower limb, where you need strength and stability, and where you have lots of movement, there tends to be less in the way of fascia. But in its very nature, it's very thin and it's very wispy, but it comes together. And this is the point, is that when it's coming together, the more of it there is, the more concentrations and the more density and the more regularity of those fibers means that it's just going to be harder and thicker and more stable. But it doesn't mean to say that the actual nature of it is different. It just means that there's more of it, and then it becomes called something different. So as I said, there's not a particular thing that you could call fascia apart from collagen fibers, I guess, which is as close as you get to it. And then we also have these fibers of collagen fibers, which blend from the skin down through the fat and the fatty layers, and then become the deeper layers of deep fascia. So again, you'll hear people talk about deep fascia or superficial fascia, what have you, but there isn't really a separation of the two. The two are the same thing. It's just that as they start from the skin, they come down from the skin, and they leave these little circles. When you cut them away, you can see the circles left behind of the fibers of the collagen fibers, and they descend, they wrap themselves around the fat, they hold the fat tissue in place, and then they go further down, and then they become the deeper fascia, and the deeper fascia then becomes the wrapping around one of the muscles, and then becomes the fibers that go thinner and thinner and thinner, until they end up becoming these wispy, tiny little fibers that are, part of the muscle fiber, and then they'll become the periosteum that wraps around the bone. So they'll change their density, but to all intents and purposes, they're the same thing as they travel down. So from the surface inwards, it's the same structure and it's the same connected nature. Hence, I guess the word connective tissue. So those are the structures that we can see, we can look at. And those are all in the category of connective tissue proper. So all fascia is connective tissue, no matter what appearance it has, no matter what form it takes, no matter where it is in the body. All fascia is connective tissue. But it's really, really important to remember that not all connective tissue is fascia. As I said before, there's different types of connective tissue, including blood and bone and skin and even fat. Fat is a connective tissue. So the tendency is we tend to forget that that there are other things doing other things. So we've had a quick look at a couple of dissection pictures, but just want to show you a little video. And I always want to draw your attention to the fact that whenever we show any dissection slides, we always give a thank out to the donors and their families for letting their loved ones go, and the work that we can do because of them is just phenomenal. So thanks very much to the donors, and it's a wonderful gift. So this little video that I made is taken from underneath when I use my handheld microscope, and this is where I am. So you can look at that there. We're sort of in this area of the lower back there, and I've got this handheld microscope, and it really is showing you the density of those fibers and how they are traveling through. And when you start to look at one sort of surface of them, if you try to sort of focus on one surface, then what you'd find is that that your picture gets taken away, your view gets taken away. You try and follow one here, and it goes in a different direction. And then we can sort of see the wispy nature. This is a bit of fat area as it's blending down through the muscle and being pulled on. And we can see that as you pull in different directions, as you pull one way, the fascia doesn't follow one particular line. It goes off in lots of different directions, and so it's not linear. There are no linear aspects as far as the fascia is concerned. It's multi-directional, going off in multi directions, and so therefore there's lots and lots of differentiation as far as the pull is concerned. And again, we can see how liquid it is. And that's the thing to remember, is that when you're looking at this tissue, there's a huge amount of fluid that surrounds it. There's a huge amount of sort of ground substances. These are the fluids that hang around each individual type of connective tissue and allow it to do the thing that it's doing, and to create a fluid environment in which it exists. And so that's really what is as much as important as anything else with our connective tissues, is the extracellular matrix that sits around it. So the other thing that we want to talk about is I mentioned it a minute ago, which was fat. And adaptability in humans is really important. We can expand really quickly. We can take on energy very, very quickly, and we don't have to create more cells to accommodate that. So cells, when you're making them, are quite expensive in terms of energy of the body. You want to make more cells. It takes time, and it takes a bit of energy, and it takes a bit of effort. And so as far as fat cells are concerned, fat cells just expand. You don't get more fat cells as you get fatter. They just get bigger. And the reason for that is because we can then dump stuff into it quickly. If you imagine that you had to build a cupboard, every time you wanted to store something, it's going to take ages. But if you've got a cupboard that can expand, what kind of cupboard that can you expand? It's going to be a lot easier. And so storage that expands is going to be more efficient than storage that has to be created every time. And that's essentially what fat cells do. They allow storage to be rapid storage, and they can expand very quickly to accommodate that extra energy that's being put into it. Now, in some instances, or a lot of instances, that's going to be things like sugar. That's going to get stored into our fat cells because we've got to get it out of our bloodstream and put it somewhere. Where else is it going to go? It's going to go into fat. And fat can get stored absolutely anywhere in the body. I mean, anywhere. But it needs a container, and the container it has to have are the connective tissue fibers, which are exactly the same nature as all the other fascias. They're going to wrap around those fat cells and hold it in place, and we're going to refer to that as our superficial fascia. Fat and fascia, and as a container, as I say to you there, is that we can look at the picture that's on one side of the picture here, and we can say that here is somebody that's had their fat removed and it's laid down next to them, and you can see the shape of that container, that shape of that body around them is the container that's holding all their adipose tissue. Now that's been cut away from the body that's on the left hand side. The same effectively, it's the same body, but what you're looking at is you're looking at that sort of external shape, that humanity, if you like, is being stored in the roundness, in the fatty tissues, in the superficial tissues, and this is where we sort of experience ourselves. It's a very, very important and interesting area, and it's been, you know, vital to our survival as humans. So this is the where we get to that adipocytes, which are the fat cells. They need a container much the same way that muscles do. They can expand and be adaptable. So, you know, when there's plenty of food around for us, they can take on and they can expand. And in much the same way that, you know, coffee needs a cup, then muscle or anything else needs a fascia, needs a container to put it into. And muscle has virtually no integrity to it other than the fascia that holds it in place. And we're going to have a little look at that now. So this is a little video of again, under the microscope, which what I'm doing is just showing you very, very close up what happens when we cut into that skin. It's a little bit speeded up so I can show you what's happening with it. But you can see that as I'm cutting into it, there's a tension and a pressure, and then very, very slowly, this whole thing took, you know, to do this took, you know, 10-15 minutes. But what we're seeing here now is as I'm cutting through the first layer of the skin, we end up with this fatty tissue that you can see. And the fatty tissue, I'm sort of spreading it apart, and as I'm spreading it apart, you can see those white fibrous elements. And again, I can cut into them, and in there's going to be blood supply and nerve endings and muscle. And how much fat is there? Well, this depends on how much fat you put down. And in this instance, this was quite a young person. And then we get down to the tissue that you can see down there, the deeper layer of connective tissue, the deeper fascia, but the superficial tissue slides around on top of it. Then I take my very sharp scalpel and I make an incision, and there is my first layer of what we would call deeper fascia that I'm cutting into, but there's another layer underneath it. So I cut through one layer, another layer there, I push that to one side, and again come back and do another one, and there's another layer, and I'm still nowhere near muscle yet. I mean, I know where I'm working on. This is on the front of the thigh, but I'm not anywhere near muscle. And I'm still scratching away another layer of fascia. So how many is that? 3 or 4? And each of those individual directions, and then once we get to the muscle, you see there's still a bit of connective tissue, and you can see I'm sort of almost through into the muscle bag there. And you see the individual fibers that I'm picking up and pulling, or those are those combination of those strong collagen fibers. And this is the stuff that's going to create pressure and wrapping and tension around the tissues. And then here we get to muscle, and boom, it's just mushy. It turns to paste, because once you touch that muscle with scalpel, it just falls apart. There's no integrity to it. So the stuff that's holding it in place, the bags that are holding it in place, are the connective tissue, the fascial bags, but they are multiple directions. There's not one particular line or direction that fascia can take, simply because, you know, it would, if you loaded it in one line, it would fall apart. It doesn't really, you know, like it. So we can think of fascia as an organ. So the definition of an organ is a large musical wind instrument having rows of pipes. Well, it can also be, in biology, the meaning an instrument as well, and it's a collection of tissues that structurally form a functional unit specialized to form a specific function. So in this instance, you can say, right, the heart, kidneys and lungs are examples of organs. But it's important to have a little look at that briefly, because it says the definition of an organ is a collection of tissues that structurally form a functional unit specialized to perform a specific function. However, fascia is more of a sort of a collection of mostly the same tissues with lots of different functions. Now, fascia and collagen is present in most organs, and so an organ will also have lots of fascia within it. You know, that's the nature of it. It's going to have lots of connective tissues that hold it in place. And So your cells and the way the cells differ determine what any cell is going to be, very, very early on in the story of the embryo. And once it's that thing, it can't go back. And so the cell that decides it's going to be a collagen-making cell, that's it. It's going to be a collagen-making cell forever, and it doesn't come back from that. But an organ will have lots of different cells doing lots of different jobs. So, a kidney won't just have the cells that are making the kidney. They'll also have bits of cells that are making the connective tissue that goes around it, or making the cells that are making the bits of fat that go into it, and so on and so forth. So that is the job of those cells. They'll have different functions, but within organs. So a collection of tissues that perform a specific function. Essentially, that's what we're dealing. The definition of fascia is a specific tissue that performs a collection of functions. But it's still kind of an organ if we think about it this way. Now, there's lots of things that people talk about as far as fascia release is concerned, and I kind of know what they mean, but it's a misnomer, the idea that you can rub somebody and you can change their fascia. Now, you can change the way that things interact, and you can increase movement and sliding, and with that there will be fascia. But the idea that you can work one bit of the body, or stretch one bit of the body, or move one thing and release your fascia or change your fascia is just bonkers. And I always say, my famous thing now, I'm going to get a t-shirt, is you can't release fascia. It's not a box of doves. Where's it going to go? What are you doing with it? Release things. It's part of the terminology that we have in the field of bodywork, and it does my head in a little bit. But in much the same way that I said to you, right, try and take the salt out of this loaf of bread. Then you can't do it because it's an integral part of it. And without the salt, the bread will be something different. You couldn't have that loaf of bread. The bread wouldn't work. It would be horrible if you didn't have the salt in it. And that's just a mix of flour and salt and water. But you can't have this. And all of those three things are integral to it, and you can't take one out. I'm often reminded of when Shylock is asking for his pound of flesh in The Merchant of Venice. And the judge says, well, you can have your pound of flesh, but you can't take anything else. You can't take any skin. You can't have any blood. You can't have any nerve or anything like that. You can just have your pound of flesh. And it's pretty similar as far as fascia is concerned. You can't think of fascia as a structure or a thing that doesn't have a dependent relationship on lots of other things as well, and vice versa. So, there we go. You might have heard of certain fascial lines of strain and biotensegrity and all these kinds of things, and you have anatomy trains. And these are great models. Again, there's nothing wrong with them. They're perfectly harmless models to imagine the body as a joined up unit. And as long as you're thinking those as far as models, then great. Anatomy trains is imaginary lines of strain. They're not real. They don't exist. They're not a thing. You can't have an imaginary line of strain. It doesn't work in any kind of physiological or anatomical way. It's just crazy if you tried to think of them as real. But in terms of looking at a body and seeing how it's loaded and moved, then yeah, great, it's perfect. And I wouldn't be here today without Tom Myers and Anatomy Trains. I think it's a great work of a great work. But again, there's not a reality to it. And we're not going to go into this, the tension aspect of it, but essentially the concept of human tension comes from input as far as a living human is concerned. So we all have tension, and where does that come from? And that's a story for another time. But in conclusion, essentially, fascia is a connective tissue, and it's driven by a cell called a fibroblast, and it's made from collagen, and collagen is a very common protein in our body, and that's the thing that's going to drive our stiffness. If we need more of it, then the cells will provide more and it will lay down. If we have scarring or injury, then again the fibroblastic cells or fibroblast cells are going to lay down more collagen and create the repair. So it's a really, really important bit of kit for us. Fascia gives the integrity to our muscles, but there isn't a single thing. Is touch really helpful? Absolutely. Massage, whatever, movement, whatever you want to call it. Does it change fascia? Yeah, along with everything else, it's going to have fascial change. But to label something fascial is riding a trend, and you can't really change fascia directly over and above anything else. So there we go. That's a quick summation, if you like, of fascia and what it is. And I hope you found that useful. Please do support me on Patreon. It would be great to have your support. If you are on YouTube, then please like and subscribe, and look out for any other stuff that I do. And please leave any comments you've got in the comments box below. It'd be great to hear from you. Let me know also what else you'd like me to cover. If there's any subject that you'd like me to talk about, then please do let me know. Any anatomy, biological sciences, health sciences, anything along those lines, and I will investigate it and happily run an episode all about it. That's it for me for now. See you soon for another episode of Not a Collection of Parts. Bye for now.